My name is Paul Hudson, and this talk is called Hands-On with Coordinators. Just briefly, if you haven't heard my work before, who am I? I run a site called Hacking with Swift at hackingwithswift.com. Very clever, that. Earlier this year, I launched a new thing called Swift in 60 Seconds, teaching the fundamentals of Swift coding in videos lasting 1 minute or less, including optionals. I run the annual Swift Community Awards. You can vote for the people and projects and conferences that helped you most over the year. And recently, I think in August, I released a new open source app called Unwrap for learning Swift interactively on your iPhone. It's on GitHub. Go and get the source code, see how I use coordinators yourself, see them in action. But my main job is writing books about Swift, like Hacking with Swift, or Hacking with tvOS, or watchOS, or Swift Design Patterns, or Vapor, and so forth. I've got lots of them now. And if you go to this URL, in theory, you can get one of them completely free. It's called Pro Swift. It's got stacks of videos attached to it. All my books have lifetime Swift updates free. So there'll be a Swift 4 update coming soon. You've got 5 seconds, 4, 3, just kidding, too slow. If you want to get in touch, please do. I am 2straws on Twitter. I am 2straws on GitHub. I am 2straws on Reddit. And on Stack Overflow, I am 2straws. Remember the first part, you can probably find me. Or email me at paul@hackingwithswift.com. OK, today's plan's pretty straightforward, I think, the time we have. We're kicking off with looking at what the actual problem is and where coordinators might be useful. Then we'll do a theory overview of how to use them in your apps today. Then, because I'm feeling brave, there'll be a live coding demo. What could possibly go wrong? Everything, of course. You all use Xcode, right? You know what can go wrong. Xcode can go wrong. It's Mojave. It's Xcode 10. It's you can all wait, right? You're in a rush. Then we'll look at some common problems people hit when they use coordinators. By the end, I hope you've got a sort of broad cognitive framework you can take away and apply to applications and start using, or at least have some good questions to ask to use it in the future. Again, there is live coding. Bear with me. We'll just figure it out. So, the problem. Back in January this year, there's a brilliant talk by Greg Letellier at .swift in Paris, and he talked about Uiviewcontroller. And we're all used to the idea of Uiviewcontroller. We're sort of stuck in the idea this is a normal thing. But when you look at this thing, well, actually, is it a view? Is it a controller? Is it something else? And at Greg's talk in .swift, he pointed out something that had been there all along that most of us hadn't seen before, which is this. It was always there, staring us in the face, and explains why we fight this thing so hard. It was designed to be confusing. So as soon as you have code in there, you're making your life more complex, making your life harder, making your code less testable. And it doesn't help that Apple's implementation of MVC is possibly the worst implementation of MVC. Of all the options you could choose, Apple's is the worst. But it's what we start with, right? You go to File, New Project in Xcode, boom, Apple throws code at you. And so we're familiar with this concept, of course, of massive view controllers. Things grow and grow and grow until they become unwieldy beasts that no one wants to touch anymore. We kind of have Apple to blame for this approach. Their templates encourage this behavior. They start you off on the wrong foot. If you look at your basic simple master detail app template from Xcode, you will get in your app delegate your coordinator container, because why not? It'll be a split view control delegate for some bizarre reason. They'll have the main view controller, which does model objects and some more core data and navigation and table view delegate and table view data source, all in one lump. So they kind of teach us this is the norm. This is the thing to follow. Apple's the world's biggest software company. They must know what they're doing. Yeah. Here is some actual code from that same project. What kind of person thinks that's normal code? So people who do all that and more shouldn't be surprised that they have these massive view controllers. They shouldn't, in fact, be allowed to complain about them, because they're making their own bed. They've made the problem for themselves. When you think about what should be in a UI view controller, the list's very long. People put UI design in there. They put state restoration in there, animation, networking, navigation, and more. But you can carve these things off. And you should carve these things off. You know, your UI design, that is the point of a UI view subclass. That's what it's there for. Animation, exactly the same thing. Into your UI view subclass it goes. Data source and delegates, separate objects. Then there's navigation. And this is where things get more interesting for today's talk. Because it's more complex than people realize. You know, fine, it controls the flow of your app, going from A to B to C to D to X, Q, Y, Z, or whatever at the end, right? The whole flow. But also, do you have iPad variants and iPhone variants? Different sizes of screen, different behaviors. Do you say, well, in this user, we'll do A/B testing to show this flow or a different flow and more? Your navigation becomes more complicated. And where do we put this code? Of course, into our best pal, Uiviewcontroller, which is a bad idea. This is where coordinators can come in. They can take care of these things for you. You can put your A/B tests and your iPad and iPhone variants into there to remove the code from Uiviewcontroller. Sorry, I'm a spoiler. You are still stuck with Uiviewcontroller. For everything else, I can't fix everything. So when you're looking at your code and thinking, I've got this really massive view controller, what could possibly be the solution to this? And the answer is carve things off. And for navigation, it won't surprise you to learn, I think the best choice to do is looking at the coordinator pattern. Hence this talk, hence why you're here, unless you're in the wrong room. Too late now, suckers. The door's locked, right? This is a pattern introduced by my favorite iPad, iOS speaker, Suresh Kanlu. You can follow him on Twitter at Kanlu. He actually blogs more frequently, tweets at kanlu.com. He's excellent. He does some great talks. Check out all-time favorite, You Deserve Nice Things. Great talk. Anyway. And it starts with this line of code that you've written 100, 1,000 times. Navigation controller, question mark, dot, push view controller, some view controller, animated, true. This is like, you know, you learn in iOS 101 school, right? We do this a lot. This is mysteriously a child reaching into its parent and saying, please do something for me. But it's more insidious than that. It's more problematic than that. It means that there's some view controller you have. View controller A has to know about, create, configure, and present an entirely different view controller. Different, in theory, isolated code. View controller B. And we end up with extremely tight coupling. A and B, separate classes, maybe separate modules in your project, have to know about each other. It's even worse if you use segues in your storyboards. I really hope no one does this, but I'm familiar with some people do this. It's a bad idea. Generally, you don't want that kind of code because you're literally hard coding your app flow. There is no reusability by UI design. But when you switch to coordinators, you break that chain entirely. A has no idea that B exists, that C exists, that any flow exists, that it's in a flow or not in a flow. It does not care. Instead, it speaks only to its coordinator. Please take the next action. And it can then say, OK, for this user, on this device, at this time, the correct next action is to create, configure, and show B. So it knows at that point what to do. And ideally, for larger projects, fair enough, not smaller ones, you'd use protocols. So you could replace the entire coordinator later on with a different coordinator. Instant A/B testing. Instant iPhone, iPad switchover, for example. And for larger apps, you can create sub-coordinators. Split each part of your program flow into one small part of the problem. Solve it inside there, and then build them up into a larger coordinator. So you get even more containment. Your profile sign-in flow, for example, might be one coordinator across 4 screens, going up to a bigger coordinator for the whole app. Now, I hope we can all agree that coupling is the enemy. The measurement of how interconnected our code is. If it's very tightly interconnected, we get it's like spaghetti code, right? A talks to B and C and Q and whatever. It's very, very messy. So this approach gives us much more flexibility. There's almost no coupling between view controllers. They're totally isolated. And it only takes a few steps. I'll give you the example code first. We'll do a live demo shortly, hopefully, in theory. First up, you make a coordinator protocol. What does it mean to be a coordinator in your app? And a sort of canonical base starting point looks like this. You'd say a coordinator has an array of child coordinators. So you can have sub-coordinators pushing and popping different parts of your app if you want to. It has a reference to its navigation controller, so it can show and hide view controllers as necessary. And then it has a start method. It will be called when this view controller is now in active control of the application. That's the first part. The second part is creating a concrete implementation of that protocol. So here is a main controller class that conforms to coordinator. It has its nav controller as before and so forth, a little empty chart controls array. But the main thing here is a start method. What does it take to start off making this coordinator? So it might create some sort of view controller, whatever its root screen is. Make sure and give that as a property of itself to the view controller, so the view controller can then call back to the coordinator as it needs to. And then push that onto its stack. Now, this is my main coordinator, so it's animated false, so it just appears at launch time, but you might use animated true for sub-coordinators and so forth. And the third step, when functionality is actually triggered from the child, you might have this code currently, make the next view controller, configure it, and present it. You take all that code, ditch it, and instead replace it with a call to the coordinator. Please now start the buying process for the widget. We don't care what that means, what it entails, what view controllers it requires. We just say, user wants to buy, you figure it out. And this is basically taking the whole system of navigation out of our view controller and putting it into the coordinators. And it brings us one step closer to solid code, right? We like solid code, hopefully. The S in solid, single responsibility principle, right? Everything should do one task if possible. Well, your coordinators do flow. That's their job. They handle navigation between your app. That's a single responsibility. Even better, we used to have code like this. Every part of your app might have to have the same code to get to a buy view controller or a settings view controller from anywhere in the app, for example. Now, all these various duplications go away. Instead, A, B, and C all talk to the same coordinator. Please trigger the buy flow now, for whatever that means from where I am currently. So there's no more repetition, or at least significantly less. So the benefits, I think, the hard-coded flow you may have currently, A goes to B, B goes to C, C goes to D, and so forth, that goes away. Instead, you talk about behaviors. A wants to trigger buying now. A wants to trigger logging in now. A wants to trigger messaging now, whatever it is. Best of all, you get complete, true isolation between your view controllers. There's no crosstalk anymore. A has no idea that B even exists, so it can't configure it or create it or whatever. It doesn't care what the flow is, or even if it is a flow. But best of all, it's all code you control. It's your coordinator class. There's no more subclass of Uiviewcontroller chasing down weird behaviors in iOS 12, who knows what. Uiviewcontroller is a big ball of mud. The less code we have in there, the happier we all are. Once you are up and running with them, I think you'll find them fairly easy to use. There is only one speed bump, I think, which is setting up the app, because coordinators really like to be in at the sort of foundation level of your software architecture. So you want to get in there at launch and control the flow from there. It's not required, but it is very nice. All right, what could possibly go wrong? So I'm going to try and do a code demo, showing off coordinators in action, and I think I've just sat on the microphone, so this might not work. So we're going to make a super simple project, demonstrating the same code you've seen in theory, just actual practice now, as you can see it working for real. So I'm going to go ahead and make in Xcode a single view app template, and I'll call this thing coordinators in lowercase, coordinators. There we go. And yes, my desktop is fine. So let's choose create. Boom. And just to save some time, I'm going to press Command R now to build and run. Otherwise, it'll be launching the simulator for quite a while. So while that's launching the simulator and so forth, I'm going to go ahead and create that coordinator protocol I mentioned to you before. What does a coordinator look like in your application? So I'll press Command N to choose a new file, choose a Swift file, and call this thing coordinator. Thank you, iOS simulator. Coordinator. Would you like to configure? Oh, I'm Objective-C. Huh. That'd be a very confusing presentation. Let's not do that. Let's not do that. Well, we could do that. Let's not do that. That's a bad idea. Let's call this one coordinators. Come on, coordinators realsies in Swift. Realsies, yeah. Okay, great. Significantly better already. Look at that. Let's try it again. Let's make a coordinator protocol. I'll press Command N, Swift file. I'll choose coordinator.swift again and press create. So this thing, we're going to use the exact same definition I gave you already. I have a protocol for call coordinator that has child coordinator array, it has a nav controller attached to it, and it has some start method to begin. So we'll say in here, import UI kit. Remember, these things do have a reference to a UI nav controller, so you have to have your UI kit around. So we'll do protocol coordinator, var child coordinators is an array of coordinator. Is this font size big enough, by the way, or bigger? Would you like bigger? Would you like complete silence? How about complete silence? Not a talkative bunch, eh? Okay, I'll make it bigger anyway. There we go. Then we'll have our navigation controller, which is a UI navigation controller. Again, get set, and has a start method to launch off the code. So we're going to be creating a lot of view controllers here, and when I use view controllers with coordinators, I'm usually very, very lazy. I normally write a simple helper method to make them easier to instantiate from storyboards. So I'll make a protocol to do that for me. I usually call a thing called storyboarded. Let's make it now. So I'll press Command N again in here. Please, Command N. Command N. There we go. Swift file. This thing's called storyboarded. Again, we'll do import UI kit. And this thing, its job is just to make it easier to instantiate view controllers from a storyboard, just because I'm being very lazy. So we'd say something like protocol, storyboarded, static func, instantiate, returns a self, capital S, because it's a protocol. Then we'll do extension storyboarded to make a default implementation, where self is some sort of UI view controller. Then we'll do static func, instantiate, thank you for not completing that, self. We're going to grab the string form of our current class name. So if it's called detail view controller, we'll get back detail view controller and so forth. So we'll do let ID equals string describing self. Then reach into our current storyboard. So we'll say let storyboard equals UI storyboard. Name is main. Oops. Bundle is bundle.main. Beautiful. And finally, we want to instantiate a view controller from that and typecast it to be the type of whatever it called this instantiate method. So we'll say return storyboard dot instantiate view controller with an identifier, that ID string we just got, force type as self. It's absolutely safe here. If your view controller has the wrong class name, that's a user error. You made a mistake, logic error. Don't do that. OK. What this means is we can now use the class name of any view controller for its storyboard identifier, find it in the storyboard, and create it straight from the storyboard just by knowing its name. So we already have a storyboard in Xcode. It's called main.storyboard. It's here. And we can go ahead and monkey around with that a little bit. It has some problems that's trying to fix. Like I said, coordinates like to be at the foundation level of your application. They don't like to be done later on, get them at the beginning or not at all. So we have to do a bit of work to tear out our app and start from scratch. If you've been doing iOS for a long time, this will be old news to you. If you haven't, this might be slightly terrifying. Yeah, we'll figure it out. So what we want to do is we have this view controller here, Uiviewcontroller.swift, and it's an empty screen right now. We want to make this thing be more interesting. We want to make it conform to storyboarded, so we can make it easily. So I'll say for here, it's a Uiviewcontroller that conforms to storyboarded, like that. And now we're going to go into the storyboard and make that view controller have the same storyboard ID as it has for its class name. That's the magic behind the storyboarded protocol. So you see it has class, come on, over here. That's not working, okay. Over here, the view controller class name, I'll just paste that into storyboard ID, like that. So it has the same ID string for its class names. We can find them really, really easily. That's the point of it. So now we have a view controller that can be created. We have a coordinator protocol to work with. We now have to have a concrete protocol, a concrete implementation of that protocol, a real coordinator to start our application with, our main coordinator. So I'll press Command N, choose a Swift file again, call this one main coordinator.swift. Looks right. Boom. Again, we need UIKit in there because it uses navigation controllers. So we'll do class, I keep hitting caps lock, class main controller conforms to coordinator. Oh, sorry, yeah, we're absolutely right. Yeah, main coordinator, thank you. Main coordinator. But we need the things like child coordinators, that would be an empty array. We haven't got any of those. The navigation controller, boom, like that. We'll give it an initializer, so we can initialize it with a nav controller. So we'll do init with a navigation controller is a UI navigation controller. Self.navigation controller equals navigation controller. If you are thinking you could use structs and get member-wise initializers are free, you could do, but because this thing's shared in many places, it'd be very confusing to use structs. You probably don't want structs at this point. Anyway, we have to implement start as well. So we'll do func start. So when the main coordinator starts, when our app starts up, we start by saying, make an instance of our view controller class, calling the instantiate method from the storyboarded protocol. Give me a fully configured view controller, please. And then we can push that directly onto push view controller animated, VC, animated false. Get onto our thing to start up the application, which is fine. So there's no UI view controller code inside here. This is not a UI view controller subclass. We're not going to fight with view to load or layout subviews or view to appear, whatever. We don't care any of that stuff here. It's much, much more raw. So we now have a protocol for coordinators. We have a storyboarded protocol to make view controllers. We have a concrete implementation of our coordinator. The important step is to actually launch our app using this coordinator. This is where the old school, must be like iOS 5 or something, code comes in. You've got to make your own stuff because the storyboard revolution took away a lot of code. So the first thing to do is go to your project settings and ask Apple to no longer make your storyboard launch your app. And it is here. You see it says main interface, it says main. We don't want that anymore. Do not use the storyboard for your launching anymore. We'll do launching by hand, so it goes through our coordinator, so we have control from the beginning. And now in the app delegate, we have our window here. We're going to add our main coordinator. So when the app launches, we can create one at this point. Now, what storyboards do for you very kindly is they create things like the UI window for you, so you can render things into it and so forth. We no longer have the storyboard for doing the creation of the app. We've got to do that by hand. A little bit of dross in there to get through quickly. So inside did finish launching with options, we can say let nav controller equals a UI navigation controller, our main root nav controller. Then make our coordinator an instance of our main coordinator, passing in nav controller, that nav controller, then call its start method. So it'll kick off creating its first view controller and presenting it. We then have to wrap that inside a UI window, because again, the storyboard's gone. So we'll say window equals a UI window. with a frame being UI screen.main.bounce. And the Windows root view controller is our nav controller. And finally, window.makeKey and visible. All old school stuff that is no longer required, but now it is. So in theory, I should be able to launch this and not see hideous crashes. In practice, I probably missed some comedy step, like calling it main controller rather than main coordinator. But, you know, you can say you were here when he screwed up. That's the main thing, right? Yes, we are now seeing a gray bar at the top. Look, after like, what, 25 minutes, you can see a gray bar at the top. Woohoo! Great success. Okay. This is just setup code, right? You know, the actual work of coordinators is yet to come. The main point of these things is to control your program flow. So let's take a look at how it's done. So we have this very boring main view controller. I'm going to make two new view controllers. We have something to work with. So I'll press Command N again, choose Cocoa Touch class. It's a Uiview subclass. Fine, I'll call this one by view controller. And then press Next and press Create. Then we'll do the same thing again. Cocoa Touch class, Uiview controller. This one will be called Create Account View Controller. So two things you might commonly want to do in some random app, whatever you work on right now, buying stuff and creating accounts. Because both of these things will be created from our storyboard, we'll make them conform to the storyboarded protocol. Once there, and then again here. Storyboarded. Great, perfect. We have to have that some sort of UI for this, so we can sort of see it visually on the screen. So I'm going to go into main.storyboard here, and then I'm going to bring out the little object window and look for a view controller. Boom, let's move that down slightly. There's view controller, let's bring out one here, and then another one here. So we need to make these things have the correct class, as you've seen already. So the first class is going to be by view controller. I'm going to copy that name into the storyboard ID. And for the second one, it's going to be, was it create account view controller? There we go, create account view controller. And I'll copy that into the storyboard ID. Boom. Both have the right class, both have the matching storyboard ID. I'm going to add a little label to them so we can kind of see what they actually mean. Otherwise, it'd be like just pushing one white screen to two other white screens. So let's just do a label here, and that will be this one, and that'll be this one here. And we're going to, make this one have the text. When you buy account, you must be buy account. Buy. And you are create. Okay, so they're completely different view controllers, as you can tell. Hey, you know what? Because we have like infinite money here, I'm going to use colors. Look at the chat. Right. Wow. A red one and a green one. Beautiful. Okay. Look at that. That's so fancy. Okay. So now we have to have some way to get to that, which will be done by our first view controller. We're going to add some buttons here. So I add a button here and a button below it. And this first one, I'm going to say buy stuff, and the second one will be create account. So we have two screens fully configured now. We have two buttons in the first view controller to get to those screens. Now we've got to try and hook them up somehow, which is of course done using the hateful assistant editor. So I'm going to make some actions. I'm going to control drag from buy stuff down to, where are we? Action, yes, action. I'm going to call this one buy tapped. Beautiful. And the second one, I'm going to call this one create account tapped. Great. Okay. So at this point, you'd start saying things like let buy controller equals buy controller instantiate, navigation controller, push view controller animate, which is fine. It's old school. This buy controller in my Fantasyland Fairy app could be triggered from anywhere. I don't want to put the code in lots of view controllers. I want it in a coordinator, so it can be called anywhere in the app centrally. It's much, much nicer. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure our view controller, this initial view controller we have, view controller Swift, this thing has a reference to a coordinator it can talk back to. So I'm going to say in here that you have a weak var coordinator pointing to an instance of main coordinator. Again, in large applications, you're going to want to make that a protocol. So you can switch out for A/B testing or iPhone, iPad, or whatever. This demo, it's all going to be a concrete type, but you get the idea. And then now we have that thing inside our main coordinator. When we make this view controller, I can assign that. So where is main coordinator? There it is. I can say here when I'm making this thing, vc.coordinator, coordinator equals self. Okay, all looking good. We now have multiple view controllers, all in theory responding to coordinator work. The next step is to tell this main coordinator what buying means, what you do when a buy action is triggered. So I'm going to say func buy subscription, let vc equals our buy view controller dot instantiate using the storyboard protocol. We're going to assign its coordinator, which I haven't actually provided yet, my mistake. Let's copy that code from the main view controller, this bit. I'll put that same line into buy and create account, because they all need to have a coordinator ultimately. There's create account, there is buy, beautiful, back, 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 great. So assign its coordinator like that, and then push it onto our nav controller. Push view controller animated, that VC animated true. So it'll push the buy thing, and the same is true, of course, for the other view controller, which was creating an account. So I'll copy that code and paste it, because I'm being a bit lazy. So we'll do create account, and this is create account, view controller, instantiate, blah, 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 otherwise the same. And now we have the complete functionality, right? We've got no view controller knows what's next in the chain or how to configure it. Any view controller can now trigger our purchase flow by calling that code. We have centralized code in one coordinator. We can replace main with iPad, iPhone, A, B, who knows what, and it's lovely isolation. So in theory, if I press Command R again, if I haven't made any comedy screw-ups, this code, you should see my beautiful designs come to life. I'll press buy, and nothing happens. Boom, check me out. Right, there's a mug who spots a mistake first. Oh, duh. You don't get a mug, you're a speaker. Speakers don't get mugs. Oh, they're very nice mugs. Yes. Obvious problem. Inside my actions I carefully made, I did not call coordinator. The coordinator here, we'll just do buy subscription, and then create account. Oh, sorry, coordinator, create account. Let's try that again. Second time lucky. Only have 2 mugs. Better be second time lucky. Buy stuff. Oh, it's red. Hurrah. And create account, it's green. Absolutely gorgeous. Some coordinators, eh? Impressive. Okay, let's try and get back to Keynote. Okay, so just briefly, there are some problems people often hit when they switch to coordinators, and it's worth covering them at least a few minutes. The first problem is it can be really easy to fall into the trap of just moving code around. Right? You had this thing, your massive view controller, and you've rearranged things, and now you've got these massive coordinators, right? And that's no better. You're staring at code saying, I've just kind of moved the problem slightly here. But by putting things in coordinators, you're making it easier for yourself to refactor. And that's where it goes back to these sub-coordinator things. When you find one coordinator's past maybe 100 lines of code, you can say, this thing's getting too big, take a bit out of it, sub-coordinator, 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 and so forth. Second thing is, if your architecture is very complex or very messy, you might find it's very hard to sort of get coordinators into there somehow. If you do have a complex architecture, you might find it becomes easier to put, say, model mutation, changing things on a server somewhere, into your coordinator. Whereas, just reading model data, wherever you have that right now, say your view controller or a view model or something like that. So separate what's doing the work. If it's really basic, do you need coordinators? I mean, it's like using MVVM. It's very nice, but if you've got a simple sort of fart app, bit overkill. Same for coordinators. Not every app needs it. Don't try and squeeze them in where they're not needed. If your architecture looks like this, and of course none of yours looks like this, but you've got friends who's look like this, right? You're probably trying to figure out how do I squeeze this thing in, because it's just spaghetti code right now. And the easiest way in is to just kind of make your app launch with a coordinator and then go into the mess afterwards. and then chisel away a bit more, layer by layer, introducing these things until eventually the whole thing is coordinated smoothly and reusably. And the third problem people hit is how you handle the back button. Now, it's only really a problem for larger apps when you have sub-coordinators, because you may have one coordinator that appears halfway through a nav stack, and if you pop before that, what happens? And the easiest solution is to effectively use the navigation delegate protocol, conform to that so you can spot back being pressed, and then map your coordinators to view controllers. Like on this view controller, this should be freed now and get rid of it at that point. So you can pop it off as it isn't needed anymore, like a stack. OK, let's wrap up. It's fair to say that these things are a buzzword right now. I think you'll hear a lot of folks talking about them. I hope you certainly are, because they're really, really awesome. But they do have real benefits. You know, I love the view controller containment. A does not know that B even exists. Shouldn't care that it exists. You can delete B entirely, or refactor B entirely if you want to. Your code becomes much more flexible. You can reuse view controllers the way they're intended. Plus, you, of course, get the opportunity to rearrange your app whenever you want to do testing or so forth, change the coordinator, and everything changes in one click. And hopefully, we've taken one more step to breaking up your massive view controllers. That's down to you. I can't do all the things for you. For more information, I recommend you check out Suraj's blog, Kano.com. He writes a lot about coordinators and giving some more advanced examples for more complex apps. For an alternative view, check out Dave DeLong. He's also started using coordinators recently, but he's also a big fan of using view controller containment to handle application architecture. Both of them work really well. Thank you very much.